Hello and welcome to the 2026 End It Now online summit. We are live and my name is Daniela and it's a privilege to be your host tonight. Before we begin, please be aware that tonight's discussion will cover topics related to domestic abuse and violence affecting men, women and children. Some of these conversations may be difficult or triggering. Hello. Hi, and welcome to the 2026 End It Now online summit. We are live, and my name is Daniela, and it's a privilege to be your host tonight. Before we begin, please be aware that tonight's discussion will cover topics related to domestic abuse and violence affecting men, women, and children. Some of these conversations may be difficult or triggering, so if at any point you feel distressed or need support, we have an on-call counsellor available throughout the summit. Please send a text message to the number on your screen at any time during this live stream, and our counsellor will contact you. The purpose of tonight's summit is to raise awareness, encourage meaningful conversations, and learn more about an issue that often remains hidden behind closed doors. We acknowledge there are many different topics to unpack and talk about, but tonight we will focus on breaking the silence, busting the myths. While we may not end abuse in a single evening, but every conversation, every story shared, every opportunity to learn helps us move closer to a safer and more compassionate world. The End It Now initiative began in 2009 through a partnership with ADRA and Adventist Women's Ministries. For more than 16 years, it has worked to educate communities, support survivors, and advocate for an end to domestic and family abuse, both in Australia and around the world. enditnowaustralia.org.au is our website with resources and services available, including a quick exit button that will take you directly to the weather app. I encourage you to check out everything that's on that website after the summit. This summit is designed to be interactive, and so we encourage you to share your questions, comments, and reflections throughout the evening. Our speakers and panelists will be responding to as many of your questions as possible. Please understand that we do have limited time, so not all of the questions will be able to be addressed. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for being part of this important conversation. I'd like to take a moment to pray over our summit tonight. Please pray with me. Our Creator God, I thank you for bringing us together for this End It Now summit. I pray that you'll be present in every conversation and with every heart that is listening tonight. Give us courage to speak honestly, wisdom to listen with compassion, and a humility to learn. May this space be a safe space where people feel seen, valued, and heard, and where we're also challenged to create homes and churches and communities where everyone is safe and respected. Guide our speakers and our conversations tonight, and may everything we do reflect your heart of justice, healing, grace, and love. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Every action has an effect. Just as a single drop transforms the calm surface of the water, our choices can create ripples of change in the lives around us. In our faith community, we are committed to building a safe and welcoming environment for everyone. Open conversations and accessible information are essential steps. Simple acts like sharing a poster can be an invitation to care. By making resources visible and available, we strengthen our response and show that no one has to face abuse alone. Sometimes the first step is simply to listen. A coffee, a conversation, a safe space to open up. Recognizing another's pain is essential. No one should suffer in silence. Sharing pathways to help can be the start of healing. Trusted resources connect people to the help they need. When we find help, we can share that hope with others. Just as ripples meet and grow, our collective actions create a safer, more caring, and more aware church. For more information, visit enditnowaustralia.org.au.
I now have the absolute privilege to introduce our first speaker. Samantha Ireland is a social worker with close to 20 years' experience working with people experiencing family and domestic violence. She has a passion for working with women and children. Sam resides in Victoria with her husband and 2 children, her 5-year-old daughter and her 2-year-old son. In her free time, she loves traveling, spending time with her family, and eating out with friends. Sam, welcome to our summit tonight. We are so excited to hear what you have to share with us tonight. But before you start, I know that some of the things you'll be talking about could be triggering for some of us. So I just want to take this moment to remind us that we have an on-call counsellor available to talk with if needed. Please text the number on your screen at any time during this live stream and our counsellor will contact you. Thank you again, Sam, for being here with us tonight. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Daniela. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the different lands we're meeting on tonight and pay my respect to elders past and present. I also want to acknowledge the End It Now initiative because it says something really important, that abuse is not just a private issue behind closed doors. It says that something that the church must be willing to name, understand, and respond to with courage, compassion, and wisdom. I've been encouraged by the resources that have been developed, especially the emphasis on listening, believing, and referring. Now that sounds simple, but in practice, it can be life-changing. Sometimes the difference between someone staying completely alone in fear and someone beginning to find safety is one person who responds well. So over the last 20 years, I've worked with government systems, families, young people, vulnerable people, professionals, and communities from many different walks of life. Domestic and family violence has been a regular issue across this work. I have seen its effects on adults. I have seen its effects on children. I have seen how complex it can be, how hidden it can be, and how hard it can be for people outside of the situation to understand. And I want to say right from the outset that tonight is not about putting pressure on every person to become a domestic violence expert. It's not about expecting you to identify all the signs, assess risk, investigate allegations, or even know what to do in every situation. The aim is much more modest, but it is really important. And that is, if someone ever hints, discloses, or shows signs in any way that they may be experiencing abuse, that you feel more confident to respond in a way that's safe, helpful, and respectful. And because we're speaking in a church context, I want to be clear about something, right from the outset. The church is not immune from domestic and family violence. It's tempting to think that because we're people of faith, because we believe in marriage, because we talk about family, because we pray together, we worship together, because we know each other, that somehow this issue is less likely to exist among us. That is a myth. Domestic and family violence can exist in any community. It can exist in Christian homes. It can exist in Adventist homes. In fact, I think we need to say it more plainly. It does exist in Adventist homes. Now, this is not easy to say, and it can feel confronting to hear. But it is important because if we only say it could happen here, we may still keep it at a safe distance. The reality is it does happen here. And if we assume otherwise, we create the conditions for abuse to remain hidden, unchallenged, and unnamed. So let me begin with a question. When we hear the words domestic violence, what picture comes to mind? For many people, that first picture is physical violence. A bruise, a black eye, the police being called, someone being hit. And yes, physical violence is part of domestic violence. It is serious, it is frightening, and it can be fatal. But one of the most important things we need to understand is that domestic and family violence is not only physical. And the idea that, if there are no bruises, it's not that serious, or if there are no bruises, it's not abuse, is one of the most harmful myths around domestic violence. Domestic violence includes behaviour that is violent, threatening, coercive, controlling, or intended to cause fear. And yes, it can include physical violence, things like direct assault on the body, use of weapons, destruction of property, or harming pets in front of family members. It can include sexual abuse, which includes any form of sexual activity without consent, criticising or using sexually degrading insults. It can include emotional abuse, things like blaming the victim for all the things that are wrong in the relationship, constantly comparing them unfavorably to people with the sole intention of wearing down their self-esteem. It might be sulking intended to manipulate. It might be withholding affection or engagement or interest, purposeful silent treatment for long periods of time to punish. It can be verbal abuse, including continual put-downs and humiliation, sometimes in private, sometimes in front of others. It can be social abuse, so things like purposefully isolating someone from their family or friends by doing things like being purposely rude to them, moving away to somewhere where that person has no social supports, or forbidding or physically preventing someone from going out and meeting people and being in community. There can be financial abuse, which involves things like, the complete control of all money, stopping someone having access to bank accounts, credit cards, bank cards. It can be providing an inadequate allowance or allowing somebody absolutely no decision-making power in how money is spent in the family. There can be digital monitoring, so the use of technology to track or monitor someone without their consent or knowledge. And of course, spiritual abuse, which we'll talk a little bit more about later as well. So as you can see, many forms of violence need no visible marks at all. Coercive control, humiliation, financial control, threats, sexual coercion, digital surveillance, and spiritual manipulation can deeply harm a person even when there is no visible injury. Someone may be terrified in their own home and have no bruises to show you. And this may sound obvious to many of us here tonight. Certainly as we learn more as a community, there may be a time when this myth is dispelled completely and we don't hear it again. But why does it still matter that we acknowledge it explicitly? It matters because many people experiencing abuse, they may not initially say, I am the victim of domestic violence. They may say, I'm not allowed to have access to money. I have to ask permission before I go anywhere. They check my phone all the time. They say that they love me so much that if I were to leave, they would kill themselves. They never hit me, but I do feel scared all the time. They make me feel stupid in front of the children. Or in a church context, they may say, I was told that if I was a better spouse, this wouldn't be happening. I was told that a Christian marriage is forever, so I must stay. I was told that he is the head of the home and my job is to submit. I was told that it is Christ-like to forgive, and so I have to move on. And those statements, they should make us pause. Why? Because sometimes abuse is not only hidden by fear, but by religious language. Spiritual abuse can happen when someone uses the Bible, church authority, marriage vows, forgiveness, ideas around submission or headship, reputation or shame to control or exercise control over another person or to excuse abuse. The heart of domestic and family violence is not simply anger. It's not just a bad temper. It's not just stress. It's not just poor communication. It is often a pattern of power and control exerted over another. And that's why someone might be calm and polite in public, but terrifying at home. It might be why they're respected at church, but controlling behind closed doors. It might be why someone never yells at their boss, their pastor, or their friends, but regularly intimidates their partner or children. One of the myths we may need to challenge is what a user of violence looks like. A person who uses violence is not necessarily out of control, quite the contrary. Often they're very controlled, because what can they control? Where they're violent, when they're violent, what visible marks are left, what story is told afterwards, and how they appear to everyone else. And this is part of what makes it so confusing for the person experiencing abuse. And it's part of what makes it so difficult in a church, because in church, people often know each other. And that closeness can be beautiful. Church community can bring love, belonging, and genuine practical help. But that same closeness can also add complexity. A person experiencing abuse may think, who can I tell? Everyone knows them. Everyone likes them. Will this get back to my family? Will I even be believed? Will I be blamed for damaging their reputation, for breaking apart my family? Will I even be welcomed back next week? And those are very real fears. And they're one reason why our response matters so much. If someone discloses abuse in a church setting, we must be really careful how we respond. We mustn't treat it as a marriage disagreement and bring the parties together to talk it out. We must not rush to reconciliation or contact the person alleged to have used violence to get their side of the story, not without specialist advice, because that can bring about real risk. Domestic and family violence is not the same as marital conflict. Conflict is where two people have a disagreement and both people have freedom to speak, disagree, compromise, and make choices. Abuse is where one person uses fear, control, intimidation, threats, manipulation, or violence to dominate the other. And that distinction is critical because if we treat abuse merely as mere conflict, we may unintentionally place the victim survivor in greater danger. In Australia, the scale of this this issue is significant. We know that many people experience violence from an intimate partner. More than one woman a week in Australia is killed by an intimate partner, current or former. We know that children are deeply affected by exposure to family violence, and we know that separation can be one of the most dangerous times. To that end, a statement that I often hear is something along the lines of, if it was really that bad, they would just leave. That is a myth. Or maybe from someone who really cares, it might sound more like, why don't they just leave? Why can't they just leave? Leaving can be incredibly difficult. There's good research to suggest that it will take a person on average 7 attempts before they can leave a violent relationship permanently. Now, that's not because they're weak. It's because the barriers are real and the danger may be real and the emotional, financial, spiritual, and practical ties are complex. Some people do not want the relationship to end. What they want is the violence to end. They want the person they love to change and they want their family to be safe. One of the reasons domestic and family violence can be so confusing is what's called the cycle of violence, which is essentially a repeating pattern of behavior in an abusive relationship. So I'm sorry I don't have this sort of up on a screen, but imagine a cycle, if you will. And it often starts by what we would call like the tension or the build-up phase. So, that might be where tension increases in a relationship and the person experiencing abuse may describe the time as sort of walking on eggshells, being worried about breaking rules, either explicit or otherwise. And then there may be the standover phase. So that might be where threats, intimidation, or control become more obvious. And then there's the explosion. So what we might equate more traditionally with domestic and family violence, physical violence, sexual abuse, financial punishment, destruction of property. But after that may come remorse or reconciliation, apologies, tears, promises. It will never happen again. I was stressed. I don't know what came over me. I love you. I have prayed about it. After that, the pursuit, gifts, romantic gestures, a recommitment to church, counseling, promises. Then a honeymoon period, which is a peaceful period, where the relationship might feel like things have returned back to normal. And this period can often lead a person experiencing the violence to hope that the abuse has stopped. However, what we know about this cycle is that underlying stress generally tends to lead back into that tension phase and the cycle begins again. But this is what makes it part of leaving so difficult. The person experiencing the abuse is not only responding to the worst times, they're remembering the good times. They are hoping that the promises are real. They're often carrying the shame that somehow this is their fault, that they must have driven the perpetrator to violence because when things are good, they're so good. But the cycle of violence is often used as a way to confuse and trap a person in a relationship. And we know that over time, those calm and honeymoon phases, they tend to get shorter, while the violence often becomes more severe. And when thinking about why it might be hard to leave in a church context, they may be also carrying spiritual fear. They may wonder, will God be disappointed in me if I leave? Am I giving up on my marriage? Should I just forgive more? Should I submit more? Should I pray harder? And this is where theology matters. This is where our beliefs about marriage matter. This is where our beliefs about forgiveness matter. Good theology should never trap a person in danger. Marriage is not a license for control. Headship is not a license for domination. Forgiveness is not a requirement to remain unsafe. Submission is not silence in the face of abuse. Reconciliation is not pretending that nothing happened. And repentance is not just tears or promises. Real repentance includes truth, accountability, changed behavior, and a willingness to accept consequences. We need to be very careful that our words don't place an extra burden on someone who may already be feeling crushed. So when we ask, why didn't they just leave? We're actually asking the wrong question. The better question is, what are the barriers to safety? There may be fear. There may have been direct threats around leaving. There might be no access to money. Remember what we said about financial control. There might be no transport, nowhere to live. We're living in a housing crisis at the moment. Rentals are expensive. Coming up with a bond is difficult. That housing crisis, it extends to emergency accommodation. It extends to refuge accommodation. If there is refuge accommodation available, is it in your hometown? Is there anything available at the time when you need it? These things are really complex. Someone might have pets that they're concerned about. There might be disability and access concerns. There might be a fear of not being believed, a fear of losing church community, or being told they're breaking up the family. And importantly, critically, leaving is a high-risk time. It may not always be immediately safe. In fact, some research suggests that the 6 to 12 months after leaving can be the most high-risk time for intimate partner homicides. Separation can escalate violence, threats, harassment, and control. Now, of course, that does not mean someone should never leave, of course. But what it does mean is that leaving should be planned safely with appropriate support where possible. If you're supporting somebody and they disclose abuse but they're not ready to leave, it can be difficult. You may want to rescue them, but our role is not to take over. Domestic violence has potentially taken away a person's dignity, autonomy, and choices, and we must not repeat that dynamic inadvertently by controlling in the name of helping. A helpful response gives dignity back, and it might sound something like this. Thank you for telling me. I believe you. I'm sorry this is happening. This is not your fault. You do not deserve to be treated this way. You have choices. You do not have to decide everything today. There are people who can help you plan safely. That kind of response is simple, but it is powerful. As a church, we're called to be a safe place, but being a safe place is not just about being friendly. It means we do not protect reputation over people or rush to reconciliation when there has not been safety, accountability, and change. It means we do not pressure a victim survivor to forgive in any way that sends them back into danger. So I want to suggest to you 3 simple words: listen, believe, refer. First, listen. Listening does not mean we interrogate. We don't ask suspicious questions like, are you sure this does not sound like them? What was happening right before? Why did you stay? Why didn't you tell someone earlier? Are you sure? Are you sure you understood? Are you sure you're not exaggerating? Listening means we create enough emotional safety for the person to speak at their own pace. Sometimes that means sitting with discomfort, trying not to fix everything immediately. Sometimes it means allowing silence, and sometimes it means, I am really glad you told me. Second, believe. Believing does not mean that church members become investigators, judges, or police. It means when somebody says that they are afraid, we take that seriously. It means we do not minimize because the person using violence seems charming, respected, generous, successful, or spiritual in public. And this is especially important in a church because potentially that's somewhere where people know everyone. You may be tempted to think, but they're so kind, but they're so involved, but they're such a lovely family. But we need to remember the public version of a person may not be the private reality of their family. And third, refer. Referrals matter because domestic and family violence can involve real risk. We should not try to manage it alone. In an emergency, or if you ever have concerns about someone's immediate safety, please call 000. For specialist support, services such as 1-800-RESPECT can assist with counselling, information and safety planning. There are also state-based family violence services, legal services, financial counselling services, men's behaviour change services, and child protection services when children are at risk. Referral does not mean abandoning the person. It means walking alongside them while helping connect them with people who have specialist skills. Sometimes support is a long journey. Someone may disclose a little and then retreat. They may leave and return. They may defend the person who hurt them, or they may take steps that do not make sense to you. Our role is to remain safe, steady, and non-judgmental. And the church's message should be clear. Domestic violence in all its forms is not God's design for marriage or family. Abuse is not discipline. Abuse is not headship. Abuse is not love. It is not a private matter to be hidden for the sake of appearances. The Bible calls us to protect the vulnerable, to speak truth, seek justice, carry one another's burdens, and love not only in words but in action. So what can each of us do? We can learn the signs. We can challenge the myths. We can stop asking, why don't they leave, and start asking, how can they be safer? We can believe disclosures. We can know referral pathways. We can be patient with people who are not ready or not safe to take the steps we feel they should. We can make sure our theology is never used to excuse harm. We can support End It Now not just as a once-a-year initiative, but as a culture where victims are not blamed, a culture where people using violence are called to real accountability, and a culture where children are protected. A culture where the words "End It Now" mean end the silence, end the minimizing, end excuses, end the misuse of faith, end the loneliness of victim survivors, and end our own discomfort when talking about this. I want to finish with this. Most of us will not be the whole solution in someone's life. We may not be the counsellor, the police officer, the child protection worker, or the refuge worker. But we may be the first safe person. We may be the first person who does not look away. We may be the first person who says, I believe you. We may be the first person who says, this is not your fault. We may be the first person who says, you are not alone and help is available. And in that moment, our response matters enormously. Thank you so much for having me tonight, and I look forward to our panel discussion.
Sam, thank you so much for sharing. It's such an important and yet really difficult conversation to have, but I just want to say thank you for your clarity and dignity while you were sharing this topic tonight. And yes, Sam, we'll be back later in our summit to be part of our wider panel discussions, and we do look forward to that. We love seeing your comments and questions. Keep them coming, and we look forward to addressing some of them shortly. But for now, I have the pleasure of introducing our second speaker tonight. Peter Stojanovic has extensive experience in family support, in addiction and domestic violence, with many years of professional training and practice through Relationships Australia. For over a decade, he led men's behaviour change programs, working primarily with court-mandated men impacted by domestic violence. Now, semi-retired, Peter continues to support families by facilitating co-parenting and the 17 Weeks Caring Dads program, helping fathers rebuild healthy relationships with their children following domestic violence. Peter, welcome to End It Now Summit. We're so grateful for your time to share with us tonight, and I know that your experience and insight will be so valuable to us. Over to you.
Thank you, Danielle, and what a comprehensive presentation from Sam. It really painted a picture of what abuse or family abuse looks like, and what are some of the things to kind of pay attention to. For me, in working with, I just want to add one thing to what Sam was saying, and it's a more of a theological issue. God does not need another human sacrifice for the salvation of our partners and for the salvation of other people. He provided the sacrifice it's not for us. There's no need for us to give up our lives for somebody else's salvation, because that has been done. Um, I just thought I'd just add that on there, because I've seen people kind of hold on to things and hold on to people and hold on to their abuse in many ways, hoping that things will change and get better and their partners might, find salvation. But we need to remember that God has provided that already, that gift already. In terms of uncovering abuse, I have, as Danielle mentioned, I worked a lot with men, and I go from the working with and walking with and talking to what we would call the perpetrators of domestic violence or family abuse. The interesting thing about that is that often they don't see themselves in that form. In fact, they don't see their abuse as abuse. They see their conduct with an intent to improve family, make family work, create discipline, create movement, even teach, and have outcomes. So their intent has, in many ways, for them a very positive thing, because if they say and people do, they have an obedient kind of family or children, and that's sort of like a gift to them. They can control their family. They can, and so that controlling element, and Sam alluded to that, sits in the background. Domestic violence is often seen, or this abusive behavior is often seen as a single event or as an incident, and sometimes police will refer to the event as an event. But we know who work in this sector, it's not an event, it's a way of life, or it's an ongoing process that has at its core the desire to control, for probably good reasons according to them, for positive outcomes. And I'll come to that in a moment. That in terms of the kinds of thinking or beliefs that allow, or that they permission themselves to act out in the context of family, which is abuse. I have often asked people, men, in these groups, who benefits out of, say, for example, verbal abuse. Now, um, the answers to that question are very straightforward. No one, no one. They will all say no one benefits out of verbal abuse. But then the question is, how is it that we often turn to that we often go into that space? It becomes almost like the first thing we do. I like what Sam was saying earlier on in terms of distinguishing or making a difference between conflict or disagreement versus abuse, and also the restraints that often sit in terms of keeping families together. There is that belief that says, children need a mum and a dad. True, children need a mum and a dad, but they don't do well. They are damaged by abuse. When abuse sits in the context of mum and a dad, that's not a conducive environment for them to grow into or to develop into human beings that have within themselves those qualities that are respectful and that are going to kind of bring the best outcome for them and for the community. So for families to thrive, they need conditions. They need the absence of abuse and control. They need qualities that sit inside and in church and through our churches, and even in our understanding of how we understand the character and the nature of God, so to speak. We see the value that God places of each individual in the context of family abuse. Each individual is not often recognized, seen, respected, or heard or valued, and therein lies what I would call, family abuse. There's the intent and impact. When I've talked to men about this question, how do you get to be there? They will always speak, but my intent was not. My intent was, and they bring forward positive aspects. My intent was to discipline. My intent was to maybe educate or even to restore. My intent was to make this family thrive. It was never my intent. But we need to see, when I speak with the men, we need them to see, we need to see often the impact that we are having, and not so much focus on the intent. It is a surprising thing to a lot of people that most of the domestic violence offenders that I work with, if not all of them, actually use abusive or controlling nature in order to avoid conflict or create a sense of peace. It's their form of getting what they want, and that becomes the key driver. So when they talk about their intent, there's a positive element to that, because according to the script that they have, because they have a very strong script of how the family should be, how she should be, how children should be, how everybody should be. And they permission themselves to impose that script and silence all other scripts that other people have, and hence the power and control issue, hence the desire to dominate sits and creates what we see is the horrendous damage that family abuse and domestic violence actually occurs. In the Bible, there's a text that speaks about the impact, visiting the sins of the fathers upon the third and fourth generation. And I think that this is a perfect example of that, where abusive behaviors create an ongoing ripple effect down the track to the third and fourth generation. This is why it's so, what I would call, corrosive. It's a corrosive impact on the health of a family, on the health of what human relationships really are. Domestic abuse is corrosive. It's like a cancer to what we would call healthy, respectful relationships. So for us, the question is, how do we see it? How can we recognize it? With great difficulty, quite frankly, because the purpose and the nature of domestic violence or abusive behavior is for it to remain hidden. They become experts in hiding it, masking it. There's three words that are just consistent and constant: minimization, denial, and blame. Minimizing it, denying it, and blaming it allows it always to continue and then to remain hidden. It's always somebody else. It's always somebody else is at fault. They caused me. Look what you have made me. What you have made me do. Because sometimes we hear said. So imagine what it could be like and what it is like to be on the other side of somebody who seeks to control you, you don't have your own voice, you don't have the right to be who you really are. And being on the other side of that is certainly what we would call, damaging, and that is abusive behavior. That is the outcome. That is the result. So when we talk about, when we seek to discuss, talk, or even support people, I think a good place to start is to start around, as Sam was saying earlier on, about the impact on what's life like for you. For us as men, maybe when we talk to some of the men, that we might sense or note or hear some of these controlling elements, we might ask certain questions like, how do you show respect for her? How do you show that you respect her as a person or as an individual? How does that work in your family? It could be just a general question at times, which will elicit views and understandings and beliefs that people hold. Um, Finally, I would just say, and I know we need to move fairly quickly through this, but I just want to say, for example, sometimes the abuser or the controlling or dominant partner, husband, father in the household takes it upon themselves to define everybody's experience. In other words, there's nothing bad happening here, there's nothing happening here, everything's fine here. I don't think we should um, work with that. We don't get to say, I don't believe we get to say that what the other person's experience is like. That's not my job. It's for them to say what life is like for them, and not for me to define it for them. And I think in that process, when I do it that way, I am then being respectful of their life, of their individuality. I am respecting the gift that they have, the gift of life and the gift of even their own individuality, which is highly valued and honored. And certainly in the Christian context, it is certainly to be celebrated, because that's the meaning of the value that God has placed upon us. So one more step, I think I would just say for us in this regard, would be that I have to explore my own heart. I have to explore my own beliefs, even as a man. Um, am I holding views? Am I conducting myself in a way that reflects or nurtures, or in some ways gives succor to what we would call abusive and controlling ways, in the way that I do relationships, in the way that I interact with people around me and in the communities around me. Sometimes there is in our communities, men will often seek to put the worst thing you can be told or called as a man is that you're a girl. That's the worst thing that you can be called. You're just a girl. When we hear that, what is the belief that is generating and implementing? And in these kinds of conducts, talks, discussions, beliefs, explanations, we get the seed form of what we would call abuse. And I think for us, and I love this initiative, that we open these discussions, that we begin to name some of these things, that we begin to start the process of that conversation, to uncover it. And it's an ongoing journey. I've worked in this space for many years, and it's a learning process. And I don't think we will ever achieve or come to a point where we just have it all clear. But there is value in it, because what we are seeking to do is we are restoring the rights and the values of human life, and we are also restoring the benefits of what we would call family, and building people, living communities, for the future. Because without addressing this issue, we just continue the suffering, we continue the damage and the destructiveness of what really is domestic abuse, what really is abuse. So it starts with me, because I have to, in my own conduct, in my own interactions, I always have to ask the question, am I being a person who is being respectful, thoughtful, caring, and does the person that's next to me, do they hold equal value? Do they hold equal value in every aspect? Or do I see myself, as somebody that might sit over the top and seek to exercise, his way over them? So thank you for this opportunity, just to bring some of that. It's a big conversation, but I'm glad that the beginnings of it are taking place through this initiative, and I certainly support it in every way.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much for sharing with us. And I know you could have shared so much more, and I could have just listened so much more to what your experiences and your stories and your wisdom is so extensive. Thank you. Thank you so much. I just want to take another moment to remind us that we do have counsellors on standby. So if you do need to talk to someone, please text the number on the screen now, and our on-call counsellor will contact you. Also, if you have any questions for our panelists, please continue to drop them in the comments. You've been doing it, and it's great to see some interaction. But right now, I'd like to invite Sam back to the stage, as well as Colleen, who I would love to introduce to you. Colleen Savage is the New South Wales Regional Manager for ADRA Australia, with a background in education and social work. She has extensive training in domestic violence and supports ADRA teams in responding safely and effectively to individuals experiencing abuse. Colleen also co-authored the church book, the church resource, Breaking the Silence. I've got my copy here, Colleen. Equipping faith communities to respond with care and appropriate referrals. Colleen, welcome to End It Now Summit. I know this initiative is so close to your heart, and we're so glad that you're here tonight. We're going to spend the next 20 minutes or so answering and addressing some of the questions coming through in our live stream platform. So Peter, Colleen, and Sam, we are looking forward to your wisdom and insight. First question that we might go to tonight, Peter, you talked a little bit about the intent behind domestic abuse, and sort of the why behind it. A question has come through. Does the control stem from fear? Would anybody like to address that, maybe just about, I guess, the reason why behind the control that is sometimes exhibited? Is it stemmed from fear?
Can I maybe I just think the quick answer to that, in terms of, it's not so much fear. It's the desire to control, to have your way. When you are in control, then you don't need to fear. You don't have to answer questions. So fear is related, but fear is not the main driver. The main driver is to really have your script, how you see things should be implemented. because then you don't have to worry. And that's how they solve, for example, these guys, may I just say, they don't like conflict at all. In fact, they hate conflict. And the controlling behavior is often behind that hatred of conflict. All I want is peace and compliance. Just comply, and everything is going to be good. So rather than fear, it's more the desire to just have peace and harmony in many ways. The control.
Mm. Thank you. Thanks, Peter, for adding some clarity. I hope that has answered our viewer's question. I've got another question here. How does a person know they've healed from historical abuse? It's a good question.
I'm happy to sort of have a go at answering that. I guess I'm not sure that healing is always a moment where you can say, I've reached it, I'm there, I've accomplished it. I don't know that it's necessarily, linear. I think it's often more gradual than that. It can certainly be different for every person. But I think what comes to my mind is perhaps that some signs of healing might be that, I guess, what happened to you no longer controls your life in the present, if that makes sense. So, you may still remember it and you may still be affected by it, because I don't necessarily think that ever stops entirely. But you have more choice about how you respond to it, if that makes sense. So, there might be less fear, less shame, less self-blame. You might feel safer in relationships. You might be more able to set boundaries and make your own judgments, be confident in your own judgments and decisions, based on, I guess, how you feel now rather than what happened to you in the past. And I guess another thing that comes to my mind is sort of being able to break cycles as well. So how do you respond to, stress and, the genuine difficulties in life and real pressure points in life that are different to the way that you may have experienced or may have witnessed or had modeled to you as well. So I guess that idea of cycle breaking too. So just some thoughts.
Yeah, I agree, Sam. And for the person who's causing the harm as well, healing is a lifelong process, I believe. But I think the most important thing is just to take responsibility for their actions, number one, and stop blaming others, and then taking action to be better and do better.
I love that. Thank you for helping shed some light on that. I hope to our viewer that has helped you understand a little bit about healing. We have another question that's come through. How can we equip our men's ministries to support men in early intervention and prevention in group environments? This is actually a really good question, and maybe you'd all have some thoughts and comments to add to this one. Peter, I think you go first.
I feel like Peter might be our guy. I'm interested to know what he has to say.
Yeah. Look, I think there's a seed form. There's the seed. Like all abuse, like all addictions, they don't start off as addictions. Addictions start off as an experimentation, blah blah blah, and then it grows into. And I think if you look at abusive behavior, in this context, there's a seed form to it. There's a young plant. There's a maturing plant, and then there's the full fruitful kind of outcome. But that's not often seen externally because it's kind of hidden. But I think the idea is that I think this conversation needs to be more prominent. Going back even to the last question, in terms of the healing. When we are not hiding it, when we are prepared, when we were able to talk, and when we put a light on it and open ourselves up to it, I think that's a process of certainly a healthy community. The issue of domestic abuse is that it's hidden, and because it's covered, and that's its protective stuff. We need to take that So I think, having communities talking to men, being open about even our own ways, is certainly important. And starting, the younger we start, I think the better it is.
Mm.
Colleen, I feel like you might have something to share on this one.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that education is just so important right from young, teaching men and women what healthy relationships look like.
Yeah.
And and what it doesn't look like as well. And I think the really important thing is support groups for men, because men are very lonely. Especially that's why men's ministries are on the rise, because men are realizing men are lonely and need support, and that support needs to be non-judgmental, encouraging, and then finding if they need to be referred on to people like me, the Relationships Australia. They do great workshops on men, for men, on how they can Peter, you know a little bit more about that, when they are in domestic violent relationships, on how they can heal and be better.
I think just also in the church context,
Yes.
I think we need more of that, and I think we just need to grow into that and talk about this, educate ourselves about this.
Yeah, and what healthy masculinity looks like.
Absolutely.
not the
Healthy relationships. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think we also just need to equip, our leaders and the people that are going to be driving these group environments and things to know, when specialist help is needed too.
Yes.
I think it's about equipping people to understand, I guess, what our roles are, and then where help is needed, and have really sort of frank and fearless conversations around that too.
Yeah, and there's no shame in it. There's no
That's
shame
right.
in getting extra help,
That's
because
right.
sometimes the way we were raised is what we know. We don't know any better, so we can get help elsewhere.
True.
I love all of that, and we can keep talking, but there's another question that's come through that I would like to pop out there, and it follows on actually from this question that we were just unpacking. How can we support teen boys and young men who have been exposed to childhood violence in both family and church environments? It's that exposure that, like you said, it's that cycle, it's that generational. And so how do we support as a community, as a church community, or even as like just in the neighborhood? How can we impact that?
I think I know. Sorry, Peter. I know that it kind of sounds obvious, but I think we really need to reduce shame in being able to talk about these things. I think it needs to be a safe place where people can be vulnerable. And I know that sounds a bit trite, but in actual fact, in action, that's quite a difficult and powerful thing to do. I think being able to reduce stigma around saying, this is what's happened to me and I am not okay and I need help, but then how we respond to it is really critical.
Yeah. And there is a saying, or biblical saying, that I hear with the men in the men's groups. They usually will come up with that line, leopard can't change his spots, and all that, which they are saying, well, we can't change. Quite frankly, I think we need to deliver a message that our behavior is our responsibility.
Yes.
My behavior is my responsibility, and I need to own that responsibility. And I am recruited into certain thinking, into certain processes. I am actually recruited. So when men say to us, leopard can't change his spots, we say to them, dude, we're not asking you to change your spots. Your spots are your genetic makeup. The length of your hair, or your fingers and your color of your eyes. That's a genetic makeup. But the way that you use who you are genetically is a learned process. And what you've learned, you can unlearn. And I think empowering that and having those challenging conversations at times, rather than saying, well, I've had people say to me over and over again, but look at my life, I've been a child of abuse, and I would ask them directly, what are you asking for? You, out of all people, know how horrible domestic violence and abuse is. What are you asking for? If you're asking for green card for your behavior, you shouldn't ask for it. And nobody should give it to you. It's more difficult for people that have grown up in these circumstances, no question, to somebody who hasn't. But in either case, both the one who has that background and who hasn't has personal choices to make in the way that they conduct themselves. And I think challenging and entering, but we can't correct unless we connect. If we don't connect with the people, you're not gonna make any breakthroughs. So we need to learn to connect with the teens, to connect with the men, to connect them in order to correct or challenge and make progress.
Yeah, they say the foundation for resilience, and children under 17, they also called adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, and this is all around. It could be the different kinds of abuse. It can be around separation, divorce, domestic violence, and the more ACEs a child experiences, the more challenges they can experience later on in life around health, around relationships. But however, the best thing that is for resilience is safety first and safe relationships. That's the most important thing we can give our teens, and then that education about what healthy relationships look like.
Yeah.
Our time is just flying along, and we've got a lot of questions coming in that we're just not able to get to tonight. We just have a couple of quick questions to start wrapping up. I think probably one of my questions, or one other question, is if someone listening today, and this is a question for all of you, has recognized themselves in one of these myths that we've spent time unpacking, whether someone who has been harmed or someone who has caused harm, what is the first step that you would encourage them to take?
I can go. So I'd say the first step is not to hide from what you recognize. So bring it into light.
Yeah.
And if you recognize that you've been harmed, tell someone. Find someone that you feel safe with. Our church members, hopefully, they can be the safe people that the people can go to and disclose. And if you are the one who has caused harm, resist the temptation to explain it away. Take responsibility for your actions, and make real changes with help. And for all of us, we can be that safe person as well. I would advise one thing though is, if we don't, I think what we can be quite harmful. Sometimes we mean well, we want to support people, but sometimes we can say, oh, you might just need couples counseling. That can be extremely harmful because of the imbalance of power. And so I would not recommend that. They both need separate counseling, extensive separate counseling separately first.
I think what I would say is probably similar to both parties potentially. If what you have heard has made you pause, either as someone who might be affected by violence or someone who might be using abuse, is that help is available. And one thing we haven't touched on tonight, and I wouldn't want to end the night without, is just the Australian End It Now website and what a powerful resource it is. And I just want to let people know that, there is a resource page there with very up-to-date research numbers and referral options. It has been really thoughtfully put together, and there is really good information there. And so if nothing else tonight, if you just remember to look at that website and have a bit of a read and see, there are people that care and that want to help. And sometimes it only takes one safe person. So if you have one safe person, please reach out.
Yeah.
That's great. And you reminded me just quickly, Daniela, the booklets as well. You did talk about the booklets. Yeah. So, ask your women's ministries leader, your family and children's ministries leader, they have these in all the conferences. One's Breaking the Silence, and there's a teen version as well for our kids, which has a lot of information. There's a lot of extra myths in it as well, which can be a great resource for your churches and pastors as well.
Thanks, Colleen. Yeah, absolutely. Reach out if you need a copy. Peter.
I was going to just say, it doesn't end until it ends. It's not going to go away. And it becomes a breeding ground for ongoing damage, which goes, as we said earlier, on to the third and fourth generation and even beyond. And I think, the idea of talking to somebody, simply believing that it's just going to go away, it's not the experience that we've had with people. And I like your reminder about that couple counseling. I often describe, okay, let's bring the couple in, and they feel safe to kind of unpack and say things to each other that they weren't able because they felt safe of that environment. Now they're going to go back in the car and travel home together. That's not a good idea, because you've got all the ramifications, etc. So speak to somebody. It's not going to go away. And the idea this might damage the family, quite frankly, abuse in the context of the family is the most corrosive and damaging that you could ever have. It's not going to fix itself. And so, seeking help, going to some of these referrals, I think is certainly highly recommended.
Thank you.
Challenging,
everyone.
but it's highly recommended.
Yeah, it's tough. There's just been one more question that has come in, and I was going to start wrapping up. I'm like, we'll just slot this one in. How can we ascertain that an offender has had a permanent change of heart? I just thought this was an interesting question, and I think, Peter, we've been in discussion, and I think you've just got a 30-second reply to that one.
Yeah, look, one of the aspects, I guess, is for me, out of all the years, because I've get asked that a lot, running men's behaviour change programs, or do you see change? I can only say when we begin to see, when a person begins to consider, see the world of the other, respect and value the world of the other, that's the beginning of change. Because the other person begins to become visible, their life becomes visible, and because in a world of where they're getting where they're being dominating and controlling, it's only about them. It's all about them. These people, if I can say, perpetrators, it's all about them. They are victims. They're everything. It's their pain, their suffering, their issues that are central and foremost in all of their ways. So when they begin to consider, see the world of the other, they respect the world of the other, and they enter into those kinds of processes, that's the beginning of change. That's the beginning of that change, I guess. Yeah. But there is no place where they can go to. Sorry, there's no place where they can go to, like they go in like this and they go out like that. I wish there was, but that's not really. It's a process again.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you for adding that little bit in, Peter. We have unpacked a lot of different things tonight. We've talked about a lot of things, and they've all been incredible, and I've just loved every moment. So I think I just want to, in a couple of brief sentences, if there was one thing that you hope people would take away from tonight's discussion, what would it be? Colleen, would you like to go first?
Listen, believe, refer.
Yeah. Yep.
I echo that. I guess that it's just that you don't have to be an expert in family and domestic violence to make a difference.
Yep.
For me, it would be the invitation, we owe it to the preciousness of life and the value of life to treat each individual life with the respect that it deserves, with the sacredness that it deserves. And certainly, abuse is no part of that. That's what
Thank you. I would just like to say thank you to Peter, Sam, and Colleen for taking the time to unpack these incredibly important questions and busting a lot of myths tonight for us. May God continue to bless each of you and sustain you in the important work that you each do. Thank you. Well, on the screen now, we have some first steps. If you feel like you need to take some steps, or if you know someone, on the screen now are some first steps to connect with. Take a screenshot or maybe take a photo of the screen. Sometimes that first step is the most difficult, but it's also the most important in order to move forward. Thank you to each of you for joining us online, and I pray that you are blessed, challenged, and encouraged from tonight's conversation. We would also love your feedback from tonight's summit. The QR code on your screen right now is a link to a short survey, and I'd like to invite you to take a couple of minutes to share your feedback. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May his face shine on you and be gracious to you and give you peace. Thank you again for joining us tonight. Good night.